Diagram.
This is Jonathan Hackett, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I am in for a treat. I don't know about you all, but I am so excited about this episode. You may or may not know Jonathan Hackett. Look him up. That's the deal. You guys will figure out what to do from there. He's got this fantastic book. Here's right here. The Theory of Irregular Warfare, written by, guess what, Jonathan Hackett. We are both counterintelligence people. Everybody knows I like that. But also, we are theorists on how to approach these wars because we have seen things that make us wonder, what the fuck are we doing? And so I'm just excited to talk to you about all this stuff. And I really am excited about the mechanics of this one. I'm sure that we're going to get going fast and we're going to skip a lot of stuff, but I encourage you to hit the ball back to me as hard as you want. And let's try to dig into this thing. I guess the first thing I would say to you is I joined the Army 3 different times, 3 different ways: regular Army, reserves, and then Department of the Army, always working in our field of study. And so I have a lot of experience at the ground level. And when I really got good at the job, and I don't mean like a deployment, I don't mean 2 deployments, I mean years on the ground, and I started to learn how we worked, I understood finally how to best service a commander and try to speak vertically, not just one commander, but all commanders, but also horizontally to the ground. And that is not an easy thing to develop. And it's a completely different skill than, say, we were just talking about Air Force OSI and what they might do in their more strategic approach to things. So I laid on that platform so that we could talk about experience, but also apply it to theory and why theory is maybe out of tune, why we don't do a good job at retention. I mean, I shouldn't have left the Army 3 times, right? And I never really got a pitch to stay. It was like, well, pizza, we'll see you later, you know. And so you have great people who leave the service who could do other kinds of federal service and don't. So we lose a lot of people. So I guess, where do you want to jump in? And with all that stuff I just talked about, all the vertical, the horizontal, all those things.
Well, the first thing that jumped out in my mind is you could draw kind of 2 inverted triangles, like one pointing up and one pointing down. You look at the enlisted side versus the officer side in any discipline, not just intelligence, but it's especially pronounced in intelligence, where the enlisted person specializes, like their career path is to specialize. Whereas officers, that's not appropriate. They're supposed to generalize, which is where the word general officer comes from. They're not supposed to be an expert in a specific niche area. And at some point in their careers, when they're both becoming senior, they're kind of diverging in different directions. And a lot of times there's a gap between the two as far as what does it actually mean to achieve the objective we wish to achieve, and how do we, not big picture, big blue arrows achieve it, but like how would one guy on the ground, what is he going to do to contribute to this huge big picture thing? And there's a daylight between those generalists and those specialists, I think.
Can we turn that diagram 3-dimensional for a minute and say one of the challenges is as you get senior in both triangles, you separate yourself from the ground and you quickly lose the ability to develop mastery at the ground level. And Pete would say, if our theory is correct, our tactics, and I know like generals like to say, if you're talking about tactics, you don't know combat. All right, well, great, but you can't put 5 tactical things together that advance the strategy every day. You know, like how many commanders did I go work for that said the number 1 goal is to close with and destroy the enemy? Did we do that today, sir? No. Did we do that yesterday, sir? No. Did we do that the day before that? No. And so we lose the ability to have mastery at the ground level, to see and speak to a commander and say, hey, man, we're losing out there. We're getting our asses kicked socially, politically, culturally, economically, religious. Jesus Christ, did you even know there's a religious fight going on? And so these things, I think, force us to deal in a 3rd dimension in terms of qualification. So many people go out, and I'm going to shut up here in a second. So many people go out into the field with no professional license to go and act, including counterintelligence people, no professional license to actually go and do that. They're just learning shit on the ground, and then they leave before they develop any real sense of what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, actually, in 2016, I was over there in Iraq, and we were preparing the environment. It was a special operations element that I was on. We were preparing the environment for retaking Mosul. So like there was a conventional unit, the 82nd was going to come in and do all that. So we were there before them doing a lot of airstrikes, a lot of lethal dynamic targeting. And I was one of the guys that was controlling a lot of these strikes very close to the target area. And some of the strikes would kill 60 people, 80 people, huge ordnance dropped on these houses and buildings. And I had about 13 of them in a row that were huge numbers. And I had one that had 87 killed in action of enemy ISIS fighters. And the Target Engagement Authority, which is a 1-star general, he was a conventional army general that was posted at Fort Hood, but was doubling his time as a Fort Hood general and a decision maker inside of this joint operations task force that we had. And he's on, he comes in there and he's like, I'd like to speak to the guy that's doing these strikes. That was me. So I go in there and he's like, yeah, I just wanted to meet you. I was like, oh, I'm glad to meet you too, sir. What would you like to talk about? He's like, well, I've just never met one of you before. I'm thinking, like, first of all, what do you mean one of you? Like, who are you referring to when you say that? And do you even know like what I do? And he did clarify he never met a human intelligence collector face to face, which was a huge shock to me because he's a 1-star general. Us on the ground would expect that a general would have met someone like us before, maybe not in that capacity in Iraq, but at least somewhere on the base. And the second point that the reason he wanted to talk to me is I saw these numbers and, I'm approving all these strikes. And it says here 80, it was actually 86. And he said, I have a problem with that number. I was like, oh, what is that? And he said, well, it's divisible by 2. And I said, oh, okay, but that's the number. And I actually validated that with multiple other human sources who corroborated that. I had someone working in the hospital that counted bodies coming in. I had somebody that was working on the construction team that was counting bodies out of the rubble. Like, I was verifying these numbers as accurately as I could. And he's like, yeah, but it just doesn't sit right. This even number doesn't feel true. And I said, well, what would you like me to do, sir? He's like, well, can you just make it an odd number?
No, God.
And I said, with all due respect, I can't do that. That's not the information that I received. And he's like, okay, but just, in the future, if you could make the numbers odd, they'd be better understood by my staff. And it kind of went on like that. It was the rest of the meeting. And it was just, the whole thing was a shock to me because I kind of put a lot of faith before that in these general officers. Nothing against them, but they're such generalists that they don't really understand what's happening on the ground. They're just approving stuff that someone else told them lower down the approval process, like, hey, I think that's a good idea. And the general just says, okay, I'm going to sign that now. And that was a interesting experience.
As you're talking, I can't stand it. Oh man, I know. This is so first off, here's Pete going to say something totally different, but on the topic. Why doesn't someone pick up the phone and go, hey, you worked in Mosul, can you help us? You're a CI guy, right? Like, where's that expertise gathering? I'm willing to say yes, right? We don't even think about that. To put an agent on the ground there, and I don't know how permissive Mosul was. It was not very permissive when I was there, but we still went out because guess what? Our fucking job is dangerous, right? We have to go out and do it. And sometimes you have to be protected by the folks on the ground. And that's where that horizontal mastery comes in. And so if a sheikh says to Pete, and I don't just do it this willy-nilly, flippantly easy, it's professional. But if he's like, hey, I'll protect you, but I need you to come to my house because we can't talk here. I can't come to this post because they're going to kill me, kill my people. So how do I get, with the commander's permission or not, how do I get out to that meeting that has to happen so I can do what nobody else in that camp can do? How do you build that capacity? And Jonathan, this is a real problem. Commanders love to take risks unless they're scary, like CI risks. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it is about these commanders. That's the first thing. Second thing is Pete is big on affect over effect. And I'll pick on the Marines here a little bit. We need to kill somebody is a quote, right? Like, I need to get out. I'm the motherfucking targeting officer. I need to kill somebody. I'm going to pick that guy. I'll build you the packet to go kill that guy, but is that the right guy? How about, have you looked to find the most influential motherfucker out there who's on our side or who's movable? Do you know who those guys are? Do you even have a shadowy image on your wall looking for that guy? All I see is threat everywhere. Now, sometimes that's the appropriate thing, but you're not looking at the political, the social, the cultural. You're looking at all these things that equal bodies. Oh, odd numbers of bodies, of course, right?
Yeah.
and the thing I always say, and people are like, affect's not. Listen, if you write 15 love letters to a girl that you're sweet on, doesn't mean she fucking loves you. That's effect thinking, right? It might work, but it's not a reliable path. If you write 2 that get you the right response, or you walk your way towards the right response, and over 15 letters, you've learned through emotion, the emotional response to stimuli, which is affect in this case, then you have the chance to compete the way that the Taliban, ISIS, whoever, how those guys do. Because I promise you, people are emotive about those groups when they're in their neighborhood. And so, yeah, there's that disconnect between, I need you to report these kind of numbers. No, sir. My job is to give you the ground truth, even if it hurts. It's not my job to sell something to your staff. That's your job.
Yep.
You know, God, man, I love it. Keep going.
There's also the problem of excluding information that you don't like or that you don't understand, which is very common. And there's one example from a few years ago, many years ago. They were doing a link analysis of a target in the Middle East, and they were drawing all these lines and connecting all these people together. And there was this one phone number that everything kept leading back to. And they were thinking, like, this is the place. I mean, there's bad guy A, bad guy B. All these people are linked to this one phone number. This has got to be, you know, the juiciest target. They had all this stuff going. They were ready to go actually do something about this target, and in a very sensitive place. And then another person came in and said, hey, you guys realize that that's a pizza place, right? And because they had been excluding the non-bad guy people from that phone number, they were only looking at the bad ones. Then maybe there were thousands of non-bad ones that were using this pizza place too, but they're about to go do a hit on this place because they wanted to believe that that's what that place was.
Yeah. Man, I got to go back to the ground truth concept. And I learned this from, and I like to get them on the show. It's hard to reach some of these guys sometimes because, you know, they're not all that forthcoming with their contact, but I think I found it. There's a general named Terry Wolf. He's not a general anymore, but he worked, and I don't know who the battle space on. Probably the 82nd was there. Maybe somebody else. It's so fragmented. It's hard to tell who exactly you're working for. And because I had built real influence with my commander, battalion commander in this case, he would introduce me to everybody vertical north of him and say, hey, Pete's really helping me here on the ground. Because what those guys don't have, and they're not trained on how to drive us. You know, they'll tell you, like, you take a tanker general, they'll tell you every goddamn thing about tanks and moving tanks around and making things happen. But when that guy gets a CI guy, a good CI guy, which is hard to define because we don't have a hat, we don't have a pin, that kind of thing. When you have a guy like that, they cannot hear from us enough. You know, and by the way, this is just Pete talking. You don't have to say this, but I don't need your fucking questions on your information requirements, your PIRs, or IRs, CIRs, DIR. I don't need those. I know what to go do. What I need is access to the ground. How do you get me out there? And then steer me once I'm there and ways, because I'm going to make assumptions based upon what I know and see, right? Because I'm at the ground and horizontal level. I need that general or that colonel to like go, Pete, over here, not this, you know, more of this, less of that. And by the way, you're wrong about that. And so like chat, because I am not omnipotent, right? But if I can't communicate vertically in a way that is non-punitive to me, then I can't help. And the other thing I'm going to say is in that stack of units, whatever commander's staff, I work for the commander. I don't work for the staff. And so I'm going to give them bad news that the commander is desperate to know. By the way, your ag team is losing every day. You're losing that fight. By the way, this project is never going to work because nobody wants it to work. By the way, all these things that don't seem like intelligence are absolutely intelligent because that commander knows they know how to drive their unit. They know where to push money and when to say, Pete, you're wrong. We're going to go make that thing happen. Okay, great. But just know that this thing doesn't work. And so if you want this to work, your PSYOP team, PSYOPs gets a lot of, they mess up a lot. And if the PSYOP team is not helping drive affect, then why are they here? You're right. Yeah. Put them on a helicopter and get them the fuck out of here. Right. We'll let the locals run that shit. So anyhow, so I'm talking about this, and gosh, we're moving so fast. But when we talk about an intelligence asset and how it stacks in terms of communication and how it can help internally, because we are fucked up a lot. Usually we are the biggest problem in our area. That's Pete's theory. But what are your thoughts on a bunch of that stuff?
Well, I think part of it is the reason we have intelligence in the military is there's three reasons: to reduce uncertainty, inform decision makers, and reduce strategic surprise or reduce surprise in general. But the problem is, like you said, with the staff, a lot of times they're gatekeeping because they personally feel affected by bad news. But bad news doesn't get better with time, and the commander needs to know now. Because if he doesn't know now and it gets out of control, then he's going to receive the information a different way, and probably not in a way that's as raw as the way we're going to give it. And it's now been gatekeeped and filtered and changed, and then you're going to end up with some kind of tragedy, like an attack on a base or something like that, because it was not allowed to reach him in the time that it could have reached him, because I guarantee somebody probably knew somewhere along the way and they were either stopped or stymied or something happened to filter that.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of these bad outcomes end up, because someone somewhere pushed back because they thought they didn't want that information getting up there to make the boss upset.
Yeah, tons of that. At my height of what I was able to do, I had a good network. It was expanding. It was enriching itself. Almost like I would, hey, Pete, come to this meeting. We want you to introduce you to these guys, right? Like it was really powerful. Dangerous work, by the way, in a place like Afghanistan. But again, that's our job, right? Is to be dangerous. Actually, maybe back up and tell, because this story is important, I think, for people to understand. If I'm good at my job, the commanders are going to give me access to things that nobody else gets access to. If I'm not deeply influential, I should leave, because I've only got so much time to help that commander, and then they're going to be gone. So I am developing this network, and the units, for me, I tended to stay in an area, which is very rare. And so the units were rotated over the top of me. New unit, new idea, everything's red, right? That unit leaves, everything's green, good to go, bye-bye. New unit, new idea, everything's red. And I had a network where I could reliably go populate the shadowy figures on the intel wall. So like that phone number at that pizza place, I would go to that pizza place, either through direct or indirect, and get people to go there. This is our job. And so I went up to, for everybody watching, there's a guy called the battle captain. He kind of drives the unit day-to-day operationally for 12 hours and hands it over to the next battle captain. He's kind of the guy with his hands on the ship, the rudder, right? This is in a desert, just doing analogies here. And that person needs to know where everything is on the battlefield. I'm about to go be somewhere he doesn't know about. But he also is bound by the staff because he's not a very high-ranking person. And so I go and I have this conversation because I've decided operationally I'm going to go have this meeting that I have to have. And I say to him, if someone was going to go out and be just protected by locals, and they've done this kind of operation before, would a battle captain want to know about that in advance? Would they not want to know about that? Because I got to give them the plausible deniability of like, I didn't know it was going to happen. And so he got what I was saying. And he's like, if someone was to do that, I'd advise them not to do that. But that's part of their job. Okay, great. Then what I'd want them to have is a radio and a call sign and their best grid they could get me at any given time so that I might give them help, because I can help anybody if I know where they're at, right? And so we talked in code because the staff would never, ever, ever agree to what I was doing. Was it legal, illegal? Fuck, I don't know. We're in combat, right? But these things that happen within an organization, and if guys like us are doing this, there's all kinds of need for this within the organization, because we are a mess internally, because most of us don't know what we're doing when we're doing it. And I'll shut up after this. My favorite thing about all this, the best illustration, is the tankers, their motto is death before dismount. They get to Afghanistan and the first command is dismount. And they don't get into a tank again, right? And so they're not supposed to know what they're doing. And when they go to pre-qualification training before they go, they shoot with tanks. They go and do their thing. But they don't worry about talking to sheikhs and imams and elders and all these other things, because that's not what they do. And when they do it, it's just familiarization. So when I look at the problem that we have is nobody's really experienced in a way that it doesn't matter where they go, nor are they prepared when they get there. They've prepared on the wrong things.
Yeah, well, a lot of them are married to the military decision-making process, or in the Marine Corps, we call it Marine Corps planning process. And they say, okay, I have to do this step, I have to do this step. And they're looking at systems of planning, and they're not thinking about the actual world that these plans happen in. And we have a lot of technically and tactically proficient people out there, but they're also very risk averse for various reasons, maybe personal, professional, all this. But the problem is when you present them with one of these operations, like, I'm going to go out to this village that we've never gone to before, I'm only bringing myself, one pistol and a terp, an interpreter, that might be weird to them. And it goes outside of what they normally understand. And their first reaction might be to either shut it down, limit it, or ask a ton of questions about it that they don't even understand the answers to, which then causes them to become frustrated, and they don't want to look like they don't know. And it's kind of this downward spiral of negative interaction that didn't have to exist that way, because they just could have taken our word for it that we planned it properly based on a different kind of training that they have never seen.
Yeah. And again, the commanders don't know how to drive an asset like us, and that hits at their ego. And you don't want to hit a commander's ego when you're in the field, because it makes them uncomfortable. They have to say, hey, Pete, I really don't know how to make you're doing great. I've never had anybody like you. Like, we need to build us like that reliably. So wherever they go, the person's like, holy shit, I need more of that, right? That's what we want to build. And you said a keyword, interpreter. Where is the licensing, the professional skills, the firing your personal weapon level skill at driving an interpreter, since they're so integral to what we do? And they don't have to be an American. Just stop with the lack of trust thing. Leave that to folks like you and me. But we're so afraid, or we can't be, Jonathan, we can't be so ignorant that we don't realize that how important the integration of interpreters into our day-to-day operation, how integral that is to our success.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, I had an interpreter in Afghanistan. He was in his 70s. He left his job in America where he had a PhD in electrical engineering, and he was teaching at the University of Chicago, Urbana-Champaign. And he was, lifelong professor. He quit that job because he wanted to go pay for his granddaughter's college. And he planned to come for a year to Afghanistan because they earned like $275,000 a year out there. Yeah. This is, 15 years ago. That's a lot of money. But he was old and he could barely walk, and he was a really nice guy, but all he could do was play chess with me, and couldn't leave the base. And the problem is he was an expert in the language because he was actually from Afghanistan and came to the United States later on. So on the contract to hire him, it just says like language this level, and he had that. So they hired him, but there wasn't like a fitness requirement or, have you ever handled a weapon before, or ever served in the military? These kind of questions that you can't force somebody to be in that position, but it's important for us to understand because we're managing risk too. I need to know, like, does this guy have the ability to go out with me for 18 hours throughout the night and then make it back without a vehicle, to re-infiltrate back the way we were going? Those are important factors to know. And with that guy, I couldn't use him for any of that stuff. I couldn't use him for interrogations either because he wasn't fast enough in the booth to actually ask at the speed that I was asking and the tempo that I was asking and match the intensity that I had. And it's sad because he's such a nice guy and has such talent, but that just does not fit what I needed in the field. And the commander wouldn't understand that. When I say commander, I mean like above the brigade level. They're just looking at a sheet of paper that says I've got 6 out of 9 interpreters who are ready to go, and that's it. That's the limit.
Yeah. Oh, you're speaking to the choir with that. I mean, we can do this several more times. Like if a guy stays for 5 years in a region, why aren't you talking to him and sharing? They understand your operations, even if they're not Americans. They've done it every day for 5 fucking years. Their phone is packed full of contacts. I mean, this is, look, I don't have to leave the camp and everything that's going in town. I just go play dominoes with those guys. Yeah. And they're like, holy shit, there's an American in here? What? And then all of a sudden you're their friend and you're like, yeah, whatever. And when they get hassled internally. So one of the things I would say, and I'm sure you understand this, but you might have an American or a legal alien of the United States working as your interpreter. You might have a local. Okay, so these are different levels of risk. And so if you've been in the United States for 30 years and you aren't a citizen because for whatever reason, but you're a legal person and you're deployed with the Army, that person's an American. Calm the fuck down. Just don't harass these people. But we love to think, I've caught the bad guy. And so they would fuck with these guys. And I'm like, here's the thing, is I'm not going to go yell at anybody, but I can apply pressure. So if anybody messes with you, do what they say, grab their name, grab their unit, and I'll take care of it. And then nobody ever had these guys' back before. They're like, really? You'll do that when they fuck with me? And I'm like, yes, don't fight them. I'll take care of it. And then I'd go to the boss like twice, and then it'd be known, don't fuck with Pete's Terps. And by the way, the other thing I would do is I'd walk him over to the interpreter office and be like, this guy needs a raise. And they'd be like, yeah, sure, of course. They would instantly give this guy more money. And now think what that does to my guy, Yeah. Oh my God, the buy-in I would get. And I would do it fast, but I wouldn't do that with guys who are like, I can't go out every day. No. Around here, we work hard. It's dangerous. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But then I'm not going to be running you as my interpreter. I'm going to grab someone who can handle that. And for the most part, everybody was interested in doing that, because it was interesting work.
And it's crazy because like we had a group of interpreters that we kind of cycled through on my team, like let some have some downtime, and, some Terps were better for certain things. And a lot of times we'd go out on very long operations, like I said, throughout the night or all day long into the night, many, many hours in the desert. It's hot, it's tiring. And those guys would come back exhausted and they'd try to go to sleep. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, the anti-terrorism folks on the base, which were not the CI guys, would not coordinate with us. And they'd go do these random anti-terrorism measures where they would basically intrude into the tent where these guys are sleeping, toss their beds, look for electronics and weapons, and like dump their stuff upside down and get all the papers out, just basically shake them up, right? To create this feeling that we're watching and making sure that everyone's safe. Because there's a lot of green on blues. So there's a reason they were doing that.
Sure.
But they didn't coordinate it with us. And we're the CI guys. Like, we're the actual ones who understand this whole process. It's not just some admin guy that got deployed and he's now the anti-terrorism officer. Because that's the way it was. And a lot of these things would happen. It's like, I just spent all this time building rapport with my interpreter, building loyalty and telling him like, hey, we'll fight next to each other if we have to. And then he comes back and he gets treated like a terrorist on the base. It's just like so frustrating. And it was a repetitive thing that kept happening over and over again.
We've been illustrating some internal type things that impact us at the ground level with the regular war. I want to get theoretic now, and we can stick on the tactical if you want to, but I don't want to miss the fact that, and you're on something here with this. We talk about nation building, but we don't understand Weber, Kant, the state, all these important facets. Like, okay, are we nation building? That's probably the wrong term. Academically, we should be thinking about state building. And if there is a state, it acts in a certain way, and then the people consume the state. And if they don't, well, then you don't get to advance tranches and say, well, the hospital is good to go, sir. And then I'm like, hey, there's nobody there when you guys aren't there. You realize that, right? That's not people consuming the state. Well, we're not nation building. That's okay, great. But we're not state building either. So we have a lot of problems with our theory where what we want to happen and what we act like we care about are different things.
Yeah, when you say nation building, I mean, a nation is kind of a people, right? And it has a different meaning than politics per se. So think about Syria, for example. You've got the Kurds in the northeast, you've got Druze people in the southwest, you've got Arabs in the desert, then you have Alawis in the northwest. A lot of different people, Turks also. And these people don't identify with each other as the same. They might believe that they're Syrian. They might say like, I'm a proud Syrian, but they don't say like, I'm a Druze and you're a Kurd. We are the same. We are one nation. I would strongly disagree with someone who would say that that's true. And I think they would too. And that's kind of our problem is we look at it from an American perspective or a Western perspective where, oh, we're all different, but we're the same. Or, we're all one country and it's the United States, it's plural states, like we're all working together. And it's true here, but that does not require it to be true anywhere else. And in fact, you mentioned Weber and Kant, they had a very specific niche understanding of what a state is. They had a Enlightenment, 19th century, 18th century Enlightenment view from continental Europe of what a state is. And that was born out of the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which was also in continental Europe, very close to where they lived. It's something that grew out of their worldview.
Very
and you can't expect, absolutely. And you can't expect to just take that as a framework and just drop it on Kurds, Druze, and Alawis and say, hey guys, now you're the nation of Syria now. And you have to do it now today. And there's no period of time. I mean, how many centuries did it take? Look, the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, there was a 30 years war that led to that peace. And before that, there was 100 years war. And there were many other wars throughout the continent and on the British Isles that led to that point, all the way from like the 8th century, from Charlemagne's period. So if we expect them to suddenly overnight just accept this idea that we have, I think we're kidding ourselves. And the problem with that is a lot of times people will hear that, especially decision makers, and they'll brush it aside because it's too complicated to deal with. It's too hard for them to agree that, maybe we're not even in the right frame of mind here. Let's just focus on operations and tactics instead, because that's easier. And we know how to do that. We can put these tanks here and they can fire this way and everyone's happy. Measures of performance are important. Where we're missing the measures of effectiveness, especially long-term measures of effectiveness. Like, okay, 30 years from now, how intact is that system? How long did that last?
We're talking theory of irregular war with my man, Jonathan. And look, and Pete would say measures of affect, right? If you aren't emotionally getting so when I make fun of us, I tend to put it in the Southern voice and be like, all right, well, get to state and go ahead. There's your state. It's like, no, Like, well, they got a crime lab. Okay, I've been to the crime lab. You did? Like, yeah, I went to the crime lab. Why'd you do that? To see if they were criming. Well, of course they are. It's a crime lab. And you're like, they've had 0 cases go through there in the last 2 years. Is there a problem with that? Because I know who thinks there's a problem with that. The fucking boss. And when I go back and tell him, and then here's the thing is this, and this staff person could be in any line of effort. They'll be like, no, I don't care if you tell them that. And so I'll tell the boss this in front of everybody. I've done my job. I've warned the person 3 times. I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say this in this meeting. And this is absolutely true. And here's the thing is it's going to remain true because I'm going to go back and it's going to be the same fucking thing. And you're losing. Well, that's rule of war. Like, all right. And then I'm like, sir, everything he's saying is false. There's actually, it's like, toot, toot, out of the commander's ears. They look at me, they look at that guy. There's a whole conversation. And then that guy's like, I can't believe I just got nuked in this meeting by some dude who I don't even know, some fat old guy, whatever.
Yeah.
But we do this all the time because we don't think about affect. We don't, whether or not you agree with Kant and whether or not you agree with Clausewitz, because I'm pretty cross on Clausewitz nowadays. That is theory. You have to understand it. And you're welcome to go design new theory, find different theory that works, but you have to go out and test it. You can't just say, the next time I get an RFI, request for information, and they're like, hey, Bob over in Ops wants to know how many schools are in the Valley. Like, no, wrong question, fucking Bob. What curriculum are they teaching? We've been here for 10 years. Go ask the partner how many schools there are. Ask him what he wants to do about it. Ask him how many kids are being educated. Ask him. Why are you asking me? Because I'm going to go ask him. I'm going to do the same thing. And by the way, why are we asking these basic fucking questions? You should be way more complex than this by now. But we hate to retain institutional knowledge. It's not just 20 individual wars. It's total amnesia. Yeah. 2 units back. Like,
it's purposeful. We choose it. We show up in infantry and we're turning over with the old team. And we're like, get all these folders out of here. They didn't know what they're doing. Let's terminate all these sources. Let's go get our own guys. And then halfway through your deployment, you realize like, oh man, those other guys that we terminated actually might have something to it. Let's go reactivate them. And you start over again. It's this like continuous, like I'm better than the last team. And then the next team comes in, oh, I'm better than that team. And it just continuously happens. And you're losing that thread of continuity that could have, I've heard it so many times that the war in Afghanistan wasn't a 20-year war. It was 20 wars fought for a year each. And that's a very good description of what happened in there.
Right. And again, you add that amnesia part where you don't know. So one of the big things I would do is whoever would say, what we got to do is apply procedure 15 to, well, I shouldn't say that in the CI sense. Okay, hang on. We should apply problem or solution X for this thing. And I'm like, okay, great. And here's what I learned from being on the ground over and over and over again. So I would go into the SharePoint server. It's a Microsoft product, everybody, and you can see like old presentations. And I would extract those slides, print them off, and bring them to a major. Couldn't bring it to a captain because captains couldn't get it. And I'd say, sir, we're going to do whatever you guys want. The boss is the boss. It's his plan. And if we're going to do procedure X to solve this problem, what are we going to do different than the last 4 units that have done that already? And why are we doing it again? And those guys would be like, oh, fuck me. That doesn't seem like that's counterintelligence, but I'm going to tell you right now, my job is to help the commander win more, lose less, help the enemy lose more, win less. And that right there is doing that perfectly. It's all 4 things in one thing because we're going to do the same fucking dance and no one gives a damn if it works or not. You know, we open rock chicken. And then I'm like, yeah, they did that 2 years ago. Did you see the pictures on the wall in the PRT where they're like, we open rock chicken. How come it's closed? Well, I don't know. All right. Well, we got to ask different questions. Commanders love that. Staff hates that. Sorry, I got to say this too, because I don't know how to back to tactical shit. I had to learn how to drive the sergeant major as well. Because if I wasn't relevant to them, those guys would knife me in the ribs. I'd be like, oh, I got killed by somebody. I don't know who it was. And I would never even know it was a sergeant major until a year later. But the sergeant major killed me, So that's the nature of what we do, though, right? Because bad news Turner, here comes bad news Turner, here comes bad news Hackett. Can you imagine the 2 of us just being like, bad news, working in the same unit? They would, I'm not lying, everybody listen to me. They would put us on a fucking airplane and send us home rather than win.
My way of measuring my victories and my progress throughout my career is by how many enemies have I created inside the organization. And every time I get a new enemy, I'm like, nice. That means I said the thing I wanted to say, and I'm glad I got out there and affected somebody.
Yeah. You talk about all the right names in your book, and it's great. And there's so much we've learned, and so little. A lot of work has been done, but so little of it has resonated and made changes. And this is when I'm hard on the generals. You all get to get paid for the rest of your lives, retirement, fantastic jobs, but you're all losers. I'm going to have Stanley McChrystal on the show next month. I don't know how I'm going to say this to him, but I'm going to be honest and be like, hey, man, I know you're highly regarded and hella smart and the king for a lot of people, but you lost. Why? You know, and I don't know what that question is going to be if Stan happens to watch this. I'm not hard on you. We have to have these conversations where we understand, like, yes, we can move a lot of shit. All you logisticians, you did great. Still didn't win. You know, and I don't know what we do about that.
I can tell you.
Okay, I want to say this. Pete would say Kilcullen's a lot more wrong than we allow, too, because he missed a lot of pieces.
Yep.
So now I'm shutting up. Go ahead.
Well, on the Kilcullen thing, I'll just jump in on that. There's a lot of echo chamber stuff going on between these different scholars. They all have kind of generally similar ideas, like a Venn diagram overlapping, and they're kind of just talking in a conversation with each other, and they're not developing any new ideas. They're recycling a lot of material, and I talk about that a lot in my book, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I won't get into too much detail because that we could just talk about that the entire time, about this like recycling of old ideas, repackaging them, and saying, hey, I have a new idea. It's a composition of these old ideas.
Right. Yeah.
But you know,
yeah. One of the,
I was going to say my solution.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
So, you know, we were talking about McChrystal in 2006 when he was leading JSOC out there at the task force. Highly successful tactical action and operational action. And we've got Abu Musab al-Zarqawi because of that action that unified, you know, the way that people worked there was a new way of working, which is fantastic. The thing in the United States that we have a challenge with is grand strategy. What grand strategy is when you unify all the instruments of national power. And this is like a thing that you hear in all these war colleges and schools, like, oh, the instruments of national power, blah, 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 blah. It's like repeated over and over. People don't understand what that actually means. You can't just mention the economy and the military and say these are the instruments of national power. They have to actually work together. And when you read our national security strategy, which is supposed to be our grand strategy, it stovepipes all this stuff. There's like an economic portion. There's a military portion. That is not the approach to take. It needs to be a synthesis in such a way that we can't actually say that this is one instrument. It should just look like a soup of all the instruments together, achieving this big grand outcome that we're looking for. We didn't even have a national security strategy until 1987 after the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which should be like mind-blowing because we fought 2 world wars without a grand strategy. That's crazy. We also fought the war in Vietnam and many other wars without a grand strategy. And it wasn't until the 80s when we finally were like, oh, we might need a special operations command. Yeah. We might need a grand strategy. And we actually might need officers to get out of their regular office they're sitting in and go see what the other services are doing and make it a requirement for their promotion. Because even before that, there was no joint qualification until that time. And that's relatively new. And that's very scary to think about.
Yeah, it is. If you have a grand strategy and you want to advance it, you have to feed it with tactical success. And that doesn't just mean killing people, right? So when you go out with we say, all right, LT, I need you to go out and enroll every person into bats and hides. Yeah. Okay, great. Are you winning today or losing? Well, of course we're winning. We need to fulfill the bats and hides registry.
Yeah, we got 15 people in the bats and hides registry today. That was a big win, everybody.
Right. Yeah. And it's like ridiculous. Like, hey, if we went to your hometown and we started bats and hiding every adult male, how'd that go? Well, you wouldn't do that there. We'd kill you. Okay. Duly noted. I'm not saying don't register people in bats and hides, but I am saying don't just fucking do it and act like you've won. You know, we're so bad at these things. And all of this goes into, like, you're following Kilcullen. Here's a problem with Kilcullen. It's not America's job to win hearts and minds for itself. We are the insurgents, first of all. We are establishing a new government that nobody asked for. They want our help, but they don't want to be told what their problems are. They don't want to be, and God bless people who want to help things. They don't want to have women just weaving rugs all the time and showing up, and they don't want to transfer power to people that don't. They like this. It's hard to stay alive here, man. And if you start undermining tribal elders, guess what? They are not going to be undermined. They're going to kill you, or they're going to allow people to kill you, or they're going to, and I've seen this too many. over and over and over again, Jonathan. Like, and I know you have too. It's just we do these things. Everything's combat. Nope, that's a banking transaction. What do you mean, Pete? Like, well, that guy didn't pay that guy, and that's why that guy's dead. It's nothing to do with us. Nothing at all to do with us. And commanders, savvy commanders, which most of them are, they're willing to get that. Problem is, they leave 3 months later, and because that window of operational success is so tight. It's so tight before they start checking out. There are great commanders that still doing their job, but they have a whole nother command job to do, and that's get the fuck out of here. Don't get anybody killed. Bring them home, and call it a win.
Yeah. Yeah, and that ends when they leave. They're not thinking beyond the horizon. Maybe they are a little bit, but that's not their priority. Their priority, like you said, is getting their guys home safe and all that. And if that's number one, that's number one, which means everything else, including what's over the horizon, falls into the background. And it happens cycle after cycle, not just in Iraq and Afghanistan, but anywhere. If you're doing a bunch of security cooperation in Africa, similar stuff, less combat. There's combat in places like Somalia and Libya, but you go to, let's say, Burkina Faso or Morocco, there's still 6-month deployments, especially special operations, security cooperation going on there, the partnerships. At the end of those deployments, people are just thinking like, well, we trained them, we got them at this level of proficiency on the range, we're going home. The next team comes out, oh, they suck at the range, let's start over again. And they start the program over again in a different way. And then it just happens over and over again. And what are we doing? That's millions of dollars. That's also dangerous. There's risk involved with that. And what are we actually achieving here besides just being able to say that we have a partner in Dakar, Senegal? Yeah. Is that really what victory looks like? I don't know.
I don't. Yeah, our again, I'll use this thing. We don't reliably and repeatedly do things that lead to success. And so we will do these ridiculous things. And you're 100% right. Like, oh, well, I went there and I taught that fill in the blank country people how to shoot. Okay, well, I was there, and guess what? The next unit came and did. They did that, And my example is always we taught them how to do sand table drills. Sand table, everybody's like you build a little map of what you're going to do that day. You have a rock. This rock is going to be the bank, and over here, this rock is going to. And so you look at, and it's great for pre-planning. Ask me how many times I did that in real life. Like day-to-day missions, you just don't do it. You know the area well enough, and you're just like, we know what to do. You do your briefings, and you go out and you do the job. You don't spend time doing that. So for the most part, unless you're on some kind of specific, highly difficult, dangerous mission that's like, we're going to go kill people, arrest people, you really don't do that kind of planning. And so we would teach these guys this skill of sand tabling, and then we wouldn't do it ourselves. And so they paid as much attention as we did, It's craziness. And I want to say one more thing about this whole thing too. Is we have these vast assumptions about what people are capable of doing in a country. It took us, I don't know, 150 years to get it to where women were legally allowed to vote. Longer than that to legally have their own bank account. We expect these people to do this in 4 months while we're here and operational?
Yeah.
Come on.
With a banking system that's only recently entered the international banking system.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you ask them a question like, you go to the bank, and they laugh in your face, that's my favorite. Then he laughed in my face. And then it goes in the report, right? Oh, then he laughed in my face. Or, hey, how's that fire department doing? I'll go. Here's the thing that I would do all the time, because I don't need them to tell me what questions to ask. I would go to whatever the thing is that they were obsessed with, the mosque, the fire department, the police department. And I would just go there in the days that we weren't there. I'd get a ride legitimately. Maybe me and the PSYOP and the civil affairs guys would hook up and go out there. And I'd be like, let me just see what's going on. Does anybody use this thing? No, of course not. Because it was not all the time, but it was primarily performative, Yeah. You could go talk to the chief of police of some far-flung district, and you would say, hey, what's your number one problem? It wouldn't be anything we had any idea about. It would never be that. It would be basic day-to-day problems that we likely were the cause of.
Yeah. Or they look at us like, well, those are the Americans that have money and equipment. So when I talk about my problem is I don't have enough radios. I don't have enough rifles. I don't have enough bullets. And I saw this especially in Africa, it's West Africa, because we would go there so many times and just try to solve problems, and we wouldn't solve anything. So we want to achieve something while we're out there. So what else can we do? Well, we can train them on some technical thing like a weapon or a radio, and they get used to that. So like, okay, well, we want the newer radio. We want the newer rifle. We want the newer this or that. And we were like, okay, I guess that's what we'll give you because we can't do anything else with you. and the embassy will approve it, the State Department will approve that foreign military sale of whatever equipment it is. But then you open up the supply room and there's a mountain of radios all just sitting on top of each other, exposed to the moisture. They're not properly, serialized, or no one knows where they are, or they're disappearing, right?
Yeah.
And they don't actually work. And if they actually had to go to combat, these radios would not be effective. So we just spent years, deployment after deployment, training them on the concept of this radio, and I saw this in Senegal, the Senegalese Special Forces, and some other examples, but that was probably one of the worst ones I saw.
Yeah. Pete has a saying, it's part of my overall theory of modern war, is you cannot reliably improve the condition of something or someone that you refuse to understand the condition of.
Yeah. And
I'll be damned if that isn't like, I can write that down and be like, this is a chapter, and now here's the workbook. You go ahead and do the rest of yourself, because we over and over and over again with this stuff. So you can understand Kant and Clausewitz and all these other people and talk about the fog of war, but we make these vast leaps in what is possible and what we think we've accomplished without ever doing the professional due diligence to act like people who are principled. We're all great people. We all have great intention. We're all educated, but we aren't good at getting things wrong.
Well, you have to think about in the planning process again, and I bring this up because if there's any young officers listening, this is very important to understand. Like, we think about problem framing, which is the very first step. Super important. I totally agree. But when you think about problem framing, you need to think about not only what is your problem that you're framing, but what is the partner's problem that is being framed too, because a lot of times those are not the same thing. In fact, they might even be at cross purposes. And even if they are at cross purposes and you must continue anyway, you still need to know, what are their priorities? What are they looking to get out of this? What are they looking to get out of you? What are they looking to get out of the other people that are competing for their attention? Maybe the Russians or some other regional partner that's trying to compete with us in that area. And I don't think we do that in problem framing. Instead, we're like, there's Al-Qaeda in the desert and we need to destroy Al-Qaeda. That's the problem. True, that's a problem, but there are probably 50 other problems that we need to identify that are connected to that. And maybe if we solve some of those other problems in a non-military way, the Al-Qaeda problem might not even exist, or at least not be big enough of a problem to require us to go risk our lives to go stand there and shoot at the range every day and have no effect with that training.
Because I've done too much damn talking in this episode, but I told you I was excited. I don't know if you can see this, but you have this wonderful graphic here, right? And it is figure 9, civilian attitude conditions supporting insurgency. So it has affect, which I love affect, fearful, duration, and then incidental, and then a bunch of other values. Can you talk about this? Talk me through what this graphic does.
In the simplest way, it's going from people who openly support the insurgency all the way to people who are doing it because they're coerced to support it. But there's in the chart, you'll see a lot of nuance. There's a lot of outside factors that are kind of turning the gears in someone's brain on where they are on that spectrum. A lot of times we look at it like, that's the insurgency. The insurgency has a support network, the underground. Like, this is like doctrinal stuff out of our publications. But that's not accurate. That's a huge overgeneralization based on especially the communist period, because Galula and all those earlier, like Trinkier, they're all based on this like communist model, which was correct and accurate in certain areas. It's not accurate everywhere. It's not accurate in Burkina Faso or in Mali or in Colombia. And we need to understand the specific conditions in the place that we're trying to affect something. And if we don't, then we're only going to affect it. We're not going to affect it. Like you said, we're not going to turn the tide. We're just going to be waves that keep crashing on the same beach over and over again.
Yeah, I always use this example at the PRT, which is the Provincial Reconstruction Team. That's arrogant as fuck. But there's a guy who's usually a military officer, and he gets to wear civilian clothes, and he's in charge of the Taliban come in from the cold program. I'm going to give you some sandwiches and a grant and all these other things. That person can reliably, across all of the places where the PRTs are, person can reliably say, "Sir, I've got nobody the entire deployment." He'd get a thumbs up. Good job. Yeah. Like, why the fuck are you there, right? I'm not against these guys. I'm not against anybody trying to do these things. But if you can't reliably do that, that's an implied tasking by me. What's it take? I'll go find the Taliban. What's it take for you guys to come in from the cold? We'll never come in from the cold.
Plus, it again illustrates the problem framing issue where we think that us being there is enough. Where if you think about the locals, they're thinking like, okay, the Americans are coming on a Tuesday for tea. I'm going to go have the
Yeah.
Americans on Tuesday. On Wednesday, the Taliban shadow governor is coming for tea. I'm going to have him
Yes.
on that day. And it's this thing where they're trying to accommodate both sides because they just want to live their lives in many cases, or they want to get promoted just like anybody else. Like the deputy governor wants to become the governor someday. So the only way to do that is to balance all the competing interests, which in the case we're talking about there was that Taliban and the Americans, they have to talk to both. And we shouldn't look at them like, oh my gosh, they're being turned by the Taliban. No, they're human beings who care about their future. They don't want to die, probably. They don't want their villagers to die. They want food and water and shelter. And they probably just want this conflict over with. And they don't really care how it ends as long as they're safe.
This book is great, man. You've got a ton of great stuff in here. I'm learning a lot from it, and you're forcing me to be uncomfortable because, again, and I don't talk in terms of when anybody says Venn diagram, I always say it's probably an Euler diagram. There's probably a lot more going on that you have to deal with. And again, we don't like that.
Yeah.
So let me go back to your diagram you talked about earlier, not the Venn, but the crisscross applesauce one. Within that thing, to understand that, to reliably advise on what to do, whether you're an intel guy or an operations officer, there's a professional capacity that has to be built with that. Is that the military's job? Fuck, I don't know, right? But that's what we do when we go there. You know, if we're going to go partner, you better graduate from the Pete Turner School of Partnering and shut up and learn how to do these things well. Don't just this is so crazy, everybody. We're in a place that's relatively permissible. Yes, it can be dangerous at a given moment, but any place, combat place, is probably permissible in most of the area. And we go out and we have these meetings. We show up unannounced at someone important's house with 25 people. I'm like, God, we got to feed these fuckers over and over and over. And by the way, that one guy might get hit 3 times in the day. Oh, I got to go talk to Sheikh important. So no one owns that relationship. None of that. And so we'll have like a governor, and we had this governor, man, in Afghanistan, and he would sneak over to our camp. He's not sneaking into our camp. He had access to it, but he would sneak over our camp and go to the PSYOP tent and just play video games. Not because he loved video games. And of course, he was like stoked to do that. That's super American. But he's like, I just can't get a break from you guys. This is the only place where I can go where I get left alone. You know, and on top of that, he had so many partners. He had I think it was 15 partners. We wrote a whole report about this. They would come in and tell him what to do. And the biggest thing I learned, and if I can communicate this to anybody on the theory side, there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. That's what this Iraqi governor said to me. Not Iraqi, Afghan governor said to me. Only room for one sword in the scabbard. So you go to the boss and you're like, who's it going to be? And I know good boss is like, yes, it's that guy. Where does he want to take us? Where does he want to go? But we don't think that way. We're not trained to think that way. We're terrified of that. Wait, what do you mean he wants to use his own radio to communicate to his own people? You know, yeah, that's what he wants to do. You can monitor it, but let's see if he can do it. Let's see if he can build affect. Because when we leave, it is going to be his game. And I'm going to say this about leaving. We don't have a successful doctrine on transitioning out. We just, as much as we show up unannounced with a bunch of people for people to feed, we pop smoke and be like, we don't pop smoke. We just leave.
Yeah.
So I'm usually the guy to be like, hey, man, we're going to leave. And like, yes, we know. Yes, one day. No, not one day. Less than 3 weeks. What? No. And then I've got to break it to this person. And then they say the words to me, but they will kill me. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I can't help you with that. And I'm the only one who's got the fucking guts to be honest and say, what one or two thing can I go battle like a motherfucker for you for? And all of a sudden they get real clear on what they've got to do. And I hope to God that most of them just leave the area because they are going to get killed. And they did get killed. Yeah.
The thing is, you're swimming upstream with that because most people aren't doing that. And because they're looking at the doctrine that they've got, which has a phased model with numbers, phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, and transition is the last phase, and it's numbered like sequentially. So you think like, okay, I've reached transition, I can let go now. And it doesn't, it's not a circle, you know, instead it's a line going one direction. And once you reach the end, which is, you know, transition, you're like, all right, cool, we're done. We're going to return to the United States. It's over, which is, that's a linear way of thinking, which is not going to give you the results you're looking for.
I call that the arrow in the cloud. You know, like you shoot this arrow, we got him. And it's always up and to the left, up and to the left,
Yeah.
and or up to the right, whichever direction it is. It's always that way. And that's the way we think. Like inexorably, we go up this path. These operations lead us up this path. Like, yeah, but that one didn't work. That one didn't work. You didn't even do that one. And you said you were going to have a bank. You don't have a bank. You said you were going to do this. And there are so many things. One of the biggest things that we don't ever think about is geography. And there was a district in Zabul province, and it was bisected by a giant fucking mountain range. The government center was on the south side, away from the provincial head. And so the province has a capital. I'm in Sacramento, or Sacramento is our capital here, right? So imagine Sacramento is just across the road. It's like 15 minutes away, maybe 20 over a dirt road. Your district, your county government headquarters is over a fucking mountain, and it's a day's journey to get to it. Guess where they're going to go for the government? Guess who they're not a part of? They're not part of that place because there's a goddamn mountain range between them and the other place. And that doesn't work anywhere in the planet. And we refuse to accept these realities. And we actually shocked when someone says, what do you mean they don't want that government? Like, oh my God.
Yeah, actually, in the book, I've got a very similar example to that in Indonesia, which by itself has 13,000 islands. So you've already got a terrain problem there.
Yeah.
But on one of the islands called Irian Jaya, huge high mountain there. And it's got all these fingers coming down. It's very dramatic. It's a volcanic island. There's over 750 languages spoken on that island. Yeah. There's only 2,500 languages on Earth. So a large portion of all languages spoken on Earth are spoken on that one island. And the reason is because the terrain is so dramatic, and has been since humans have inhabited that for 65,000 years, that these little niche communities of 100 people or so develop their own language completely in isolation from a guy 100 meters on the other side of the mountain, because it's just impossible, physically impossible to scale that mountainside, which in America is very tough to understand. So like from our Western military mindset, it's like, yeah, but they're all Indonesian. Well, not only are they not Indonesian, they're not even like on the same island thinking that they're united. They're at war with each other over this tiny little 100-meter escarpment that they in their culture's history and memory cannot remember a single time that they had an engagement with the people on the other side of that thing, and they can't even speak to them because their languages have diverged for so long.
Yeah, and that is a good frame up. I'll use another example very similar. There's a lady, I don't know if you know the work of Benedicte Grima, but she settled in ethnography style in Pashtunistan. And so she learned how to be these people. And when you first come, you don't have to abide the culture. But the longer she stayed, the more she had to abide it, because she became at least aped, like she was inculcated. So to the point where she would need a squire and cover up, right? And she wrote this wonderful book. And one of the stories in the book is, so two banditos rob the capital city, right? They rob the bank, we'll say. And they drive through Village A on the way to their home in Village B. Well, the cops let out. They're like, well, we're going to go get those guys. And so they follow the banditos into Village A. And Village A is like, hey, we don't do cops around here. And they shot them. They got into a gunfight. And there's a longer version of this story, but the bottom line is then the Americans are like, why'd you shoot those guys? They're from the government. We don't do cops around here.
Yeah.
Like, those guys here, they're your problem. They're in Village B. Don't you come through here, though, because we don't do cops around here. And so you have these problems that you could never understand that they exist, but there they are. Like, just stay out of Village A, or send a guy like you or me to go, hey, how do we get through here without causing you guys trouble? We don't do cops around here. Okay, I got that part. Is there any way, and then you start working on the process. And maybe it takes you 5 years to figure it out. But they don't do cops around there. And so you have a problem that you cannot solve by just saying, hello, I'm from America. Here's an apple pie.
Yeah.
Man, it drives me crazy when war is hard, for sure. And again, everybody's doing their best, but
the thing is, we make it harder because we the West want a conventional war. We want tanks and aircraft and submarines. Like, that's what we're built for. That's what we've done. We've been very good at it. and we just really want to ignore the current conflict that is not that. And we're like, okay, that's bothersome, but I want to use a tank and engage in a tank battle and have a dogfight with my F-35 against China's or Russia's fifth generation fighter. Like, that's what we want,
Right.
And meanwhile, we have airplanes falling off of aircraft carriers into the ocean, but we still think that that's what we're good at because that's what we want to be good at.
Yeah.
But we just spent 20 years learning to be good at something else, and we're kind of ignoring those successes, which I guarantee means we're going to forget them the next time it happens.
If you will go with me on this little journey, do you have time? We're at an hour. Can you go a little longer?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay. Counterintelligence people are in effect fighter jocks. We just do a different job, right? But are we treated like that? No. So we show up, nobody knows us, nobody gives a fuck about us. We don't have wings, and so we have to prove our way in. We're not required to do any kind of like rest or that kind of thing. Who cares about the rest part of it? But the kind of access we should have, the kind of tours we should have, it should be a job that you're primarily not at home, or home is wherever you are. And like you are going to Yemen and living there for a while, and maybe you're doing research or whatever it is. Maybe, just maybe, you grab, like they do with fighter pilots, you grab old fighter pilots, like, here's how you do fighter piloting, and you work on these things. But we don't care about that. We just let that smartness drain away all the time. We have so many jobs like that where we just don't hold on to the capacity. We don't develop specific. It's very hard to do all these things I'm bitching about are all very hard to do, but we don't build people who can do them reliably. And so when you see a general show up in the field where he's absolutely irrelevant, waving his arms around, talking about how we're going to rebuild the bazaar in 2011, like, hey man, shut up, please shut up. I got to go now back and fix your stuff. And I can't even say that to that guy, because you know what happens? I get fired and they send me home. You don't tell General so-and-so that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, he
was very unhappy.
He was very unhappy with that. Grab your bags. That thing over there is smoking. Get on it. So, but that's what happens over and over again. So we don't treat our collectors in the right way, where they become professional, and it's hard to stay in there. And really, our job specifically, like going out and doing these things, I'm not talking about the strategic side or the strategical side or anything else. It's so goddamn hard. We should have these people in the field all the time, learning things. A language is, to me, sort of irrelevant, but by being in places, you'll develop language capacity. But that's what Pete says. You were on. I love this podcast that you were on. It's the Krulak Center's podcast. You guys should check it out. It's called the Brutecast. Just type it up, and you'll see Jonathan just kill it for about an hour talking about all this theory and everything. If you could instill like one thing at the Krulak Center to get them to be just a skosh better, what's the thing that you would want them to do? Like, how would you, apart from reading and buying this fantastic book right there, and there's the link down below. You know what I always say, buy two, because it'll be a good buddy read. Hard reading. You got to be prepared for this, because
but it's short.
You know about war. It's short. A lot of words in each page though. If you do know about war, it's gonna set you off your center, which should be a good thing if you know about war. If you want to learn about war, maybe walk in gently with this book, because it's challenging. There's a lot of words and a lot of theory that Jonathan's already it's like a full third of we'll say a quarter of the book is references, right? And so this is a deeply researched book. Okay, so the Krulak Center question. If you were to give them advice and they promised they would take it, what's one thing that you would have them do?
I'm going to cheat and have two things. First thing is we need to return to our roots, which is the strategic corporal, the 3-block war, which was actually developed by General Krulak in the 1990s for Somalia. We need to go back to that way of understanding that we need to empower those super low-level folks, because they're not really low-level. They're actually the ones doing everything. The decision makers are several layers of comfort removed from what those people are doing. And we need to remember that and reorient on that, and stop worrying about getting promoted or not getting promoted or getting in trouble. No, we need to think about what are these guys doing and how can we use them in dynamic ways. Multiple different things being achieved by a single corporal, for example. We need to get back to that. The other thing I would think about is, the other thing is allies and partners. We need to re-emphasize, because we used to emphasize it. We've de-emphasized it. We've shrunk it way down. We need to focus on partnerships and enabling partners to sustain themselves. we should be working ourselves out of a job. And that's how we should be designing the way forward with our partnerships, which is what most things we do today are with partners. We don't do much unilaterally anymore, except at very niche areas. Building partnerships and learning how to work with allies and partners from, like, let's say from the corporal all the way to the colonel, all the way to the general. We need to have a robust way of everyone at every level understanding their place and their progression in that partnership. Because what ultimately should be happening is that we're returning over time to the same partners. Like I should be going back to Bob, the corporal. 5 years later, it's Bob, the staff sergeant, and then it's Bob, the sergeant major, and he remembers me. We hug each other every time, and we're having tea together and reminiscing over 15 years ago when we first met and all that. That's what really we should be doing. And it will cost more. It'll be more complicated, but that's the direction of success. You know, it's not the direction
also a critical path.
Yes.
And you can't skip those steps, you know. Yeah. If it's I was just example that one of the commanders, tank commander, gives me a lieutenant. He's like, "Can you help him? He's just a little out of sync with his partner. His partner is an Iraqi general." And we come in to sit down, and this guy can't stop, like, the general is like taking his glasses off, fiddle fucking with his papers. And the lieutenant he's fucking clueless, you know? And so I'm just observing, right? Because that's my job. And then I have to jump in. And I'm like, "Hey, to the general, do you got something you need to be doing?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm real fucking busy, man." And I'm like, "Okay, we're going to get out of here." And then he's like, "Come back at 7. Okay, great. And so we leave. And the lieutenant's all mad at me. He's like, "You can't take over my meeting." I'm like, "Hey, man, I'm here to help. And you were fucking up. You didn't read the body language of that thing. And this is what I do. I'm going to tell you, that guy wants you out of his office. I'll come back and talk to him later. You chill out." And he's like, "No, I will come back. It's my relation." Okay, great. Well, then let's learn. So we came back, and he was all about it. He was going to work. And it was Arab Cup time. They were watching Iraq play soccer on fucking TV at 7:00. We got invited to a little party, right? That's awesome. This guy, he's like, "We're going to work." And I'm like, "We are not fucking working. We are watching soccer." And guess who we're rooting for? That's right, Iraq. And so, but, you know, look, he's young, he's inexperienced, right? And thankfully, that commander gave me the ability to take this lieutenant and tune him up a little bit. Maybe he learned less that time, maybe he didn't. But we need more of that, not less. Yeah. And what you're talking about, that compression of authority. Give Pete the authority to go out and do this thing. If Pete wants to go see something, get him a truck and let him go out and go do it. If he doesn't want to have anybody with it, and look, I'm making big, broad statements here, but we need people that become experts so that we can do expert shit.
Absolutely. We need specialists at a high level.
Yeah. Another thing that I have to discuss with you just briefly, because it's so missed by what we do. We talk about a lot of countries. We went to a place called Iraq, and on the flag, it says the fucking words Allah Akbar. Okay, so there is no separation of church and state as far as we're concerned. They'll tell you all day long, we don't care about religion, but it says Allah Akbar on the flag. So you have to figure out what that means. And so you can say, it's sectarian violence. Well, they just told me it wasn't. So are you right or are they right? Are they lying to me or are you lying to me? You know what? I don't know what the answer is, right? But we have to accept that religion is part of these places. Pete, don't you dare go to that mosque. But I was invited by an elder. I'm not turning that invite down. Yes. He trumps you around here, you know, because you sit over there in your castle. I'm going to go out with this guy and go to his mosque. By the way, his mosque was a fucking pad of dirt. And we did this, and he taught me how to pray, and I taught him how to pray the American way. So these things, that refusal to accept that religion is part of these places and how they raise their women, how they do these things is elemental for them. It's part of the cultural thing that we suck at. So when you think about religion and our desperate belief that everybody's religion and state are separate, even when ours aren't, what do we do about that? How do we approach that from terms of theory and then maybe some practice?
Well, we have to be objective, first of all. We can't bring what we think is true there and then make it true, because that's just not going to work out. There's a great book, Ugly American. Actually, when I went to Special Operations Command for my very first deployment with them, that was mandatory reading before we were allowed to deploy. So we had to read the book and then come back and talk about the book to show that we had read it, or else we were not allowed to go on a deployment. That's the way to do it, is to force us to reorient and reframe the way we're approaching things, because what we know and what we assume may be true in our worldview, in our comfort zone, but the world is not us. We're a tiny facet, and we have very different ways. I mean, even if, let's say you go to Germany, maybe you look like a person that lives there, but you're not a German. Even if you speak German, you're not a German. It's not about just the language. There's such deep differences
Yeah.
even between people who look alike, which, when going to your point about sectarianism, and when earlier we were talking about nationalism, there are many nations in Iraq. It's not the nation of Iraq.
Right.
Even within the Shia community, there's different types of Shia communities. And the thing is, their religion is so tied into their nationhood, their identity, that if they're fighting, they've got some religious flags up, because that religion is defined within their particular nation that they live in. And that nation might not be huge. It might be one town. It might be half a town. Or it might be the whole western part of the country, like Anbar province. It might be a very specific group of Sunnis. Well, they're Sunnis, and they're also tribal folks that have families that they can trace back 100 generations, and we don't understand it that way. Instead, we think about like, oh, they must be professional fighters, and they just are upset about us and about each other. No, that's way too basic and incorrect. And we need to think about it big picture. How did they get there? Why are they upset? What are the fundamental things? And don't just make the assumption that, oh, because they're one's Christian and one's Muslim. That is absolutely ignorant.
Yeah. We have to turn the camera on ourselves too and see how we behave in these meetings. And when my interpreter leans over, those are the Shia. And I'm like, how do I know? And I go, do you see their shirts? They are different. And I look and I'm like, no, they're not. That's that. And the clue is here is that I don't know what the fuck is going on in the room that I'm sitting in. Right.
Yep.
And so I'm like, oh shit, because I've fucked up so many times. I'm like, now's the time when I shut up. And then later on, he teaches me how to see Shia versus Sunni.
Yeah.
And then later on, he's like, do you see the Shia? And I'm like, I see the Shia. And then I watch the body language between those guys, because they're all communicating,
Yep.
And if you don't have the ability to shut up and learn something, my rule is, as a norm, if USAID or in particular state shows up, it's fucked up. And I'm going to pay attention to it, because they're going to be messing things up. They don't, in general, the US is a net destabilizer. We come somewhere and things get crazy. Crime goes up. All these other things happen. And so I look for those things. And these people are typically resume first and be wrong like 15th on their list. And so they'll tell me what they've studied and everything, but they don't know how to deliver results. And then they'll tell someone they delivered results. And then I go back and I go, you know what? I just checked out on the results of that shit, and it does not work. Matter of fact, he hates that guy.
Yeah.
It's over and over again, man. And the thing is, it's not that I'm omnipotent. It's just us. I know us.
Yeah. Think about Somalia, 1992 and 93, right before the Black Hawk Down incident, before Gothic Serpent. One of the contributing factors to that crazy conflict in that year was that the UN and the United States delivered grain to different rival factions who we didn't really understand were in existential opposition to each other. And we helped to enable the breakdown of the society that ended up resulting in Black Hawk Down and all the conflict that happened there.
When we have resources and we bring them to a place that doesn't have enough resources, and we are like a big-titted blonde with candy lips, like they want us around to get things, not just because we have things, but they love us. They love the idea of Americans, and we start to let them down. If you say we have a bunch of resources, but we don't presume to know how you guys would want to push them out, shall we meet? What do you think? And if there's a governor there, hey, governor, what do we do? And if you're not tasked by that governor, yes, he's going to do things in his interest. Guess what? He's got to stay alive there. So let him do it, and then work on that problem, the problem subsequent to that. But we refuse to do that, because state knows better than those people, and they will tell them what they're supposed to do. And you'll hear it when they talk about foreign policy. Oh, we'll just have Israel do this. What?
Yeah.
What? Why? And I'm using Israel, right? Any place we care so much about what the ambassador says, but we don't care about what the actual fucking president says, or the governor,
or what's the cultural reality. I mean, think about like nepotism, for example. There have been many countries I've been in where it's been our priority to ensure that corruption is reduced by getting rid of nepotism. But in many of these cultures around the world, nepotism isn't a bad word. It's the way the culture is designed. Like, my uncle will appoint me to take over his position eventually, and like that's how I was raised, and everybody understands that. Nobody's upset about it. That's just the way it is. And then the Americans come in and they're like, no, you can't do that. It's got to be somebody else. But then you're disrupting this entire system that has existed for a very long time. But you're doing it in a way that you're not You're not making it theirs. You're just taking your thing and putting it on them and saying, hey, this is right because I said it's right, because we have it right in America. And like you said, meanwhile, if we look at ourselves in the mirror, like maybe we don't actually have it perfectly over here. You know, there's some flaws going on, and there have been. And even our Constitution is a compromise document. If you look at the history of how our Constitution was written, that was not something that anyone in that room agreed on. Like no one in that room wanted the document that came out. It was because they all had to agree on competing ideas. And then here we are now today saying like, oh no, you need to make a constitution. This is the constitution you're going to have. How can we be so arrogant to think that we got it right now? And we've never had it right. It wasn't designed that way, even for us.
Yeah. Do you remember when we tried to introduce the new Iraqi flag?
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh my God, it's terrible, right? And how dare we, you know? And then come around and act like we have other good ideas after you just do that, you know? I mean, what's his name, Brennan? You know, good. You have a job to do. Please do better than that.
Yeah.
Please do better than defining what somebody else is.
Do your homework.
That's the first mistake. Yeah. We had a general where we partnered with. This is in Iraq, and it's out in the Baghdad province, but in the hinterlands and the farms. And we were doing the whole thing, like, advise, assist, partner with, that kind of thing. And so we had this general there, and the commanders would be great. The American commanders would be like, nope, you're the boss. Didn't act like it, but that's what we would say. So one day that general is trying to get onto the American camp because we're going to host him for some kind of meeting, because we always go to his house. So he's coming to our house. And they froze that dude out off of the camp for hours in the heat. And just for anybody watching, if you don't know this, if the opposite was true, like I watched this happen with my own eyes. American commanders are very powerful. This guy owns this space. Nobody, and it's infantry. Nobody's going to come in there unless they want to get killed. And there's all kinds of fuckery around the gate. And there's a shooting range by the gate. So there's all kinds of things you got to coordinate to get up. And by the way, the guy on the radio is gay as hell. So he's like, all right, everybody. And it was great. It was hilarious, right? But there was fuckery going on. And so the boss gets on the whole entire net, and it's like, everybody get the fuck out of my way. And here's what everybody did. They got the fuck out of the way. And they got back to fuckery and being in each other's way. Well, that general didn't get that courtesy. A general, right? So we didn't treat him like a general. We treated him like someone who needed to sit in a fucking Humvee locked out of a camp that we tell him is his property, right? Mm-hmm. And that guy never forgot that shit. And so we worked, my interpreter and I, we worked on him for a long time. And he always held that grudge. He was always pissed off. So the next commander inherited that grudge. And then I would say to the commander, and these guys were all great, right? They all are great at what they do and they understand these things. But it took them a while, each of them, to understand, oh, there's a rock in my backpack I didn't know about. This guy's pissed at me. Yes, because of your buddy in the past. So I don't know how we fix this, but as long as you know it's there, maybe we can minimize it. Maybe we can go do the thing, invite him over, and everybody just bam with the salute and rock and roll that guy right through. Don't ever slow that guy down, Yep. But even that didn't fix that relationship. He was so pissed for so long because there have been all these other little micro cuts where it's like, you're not in charge. You're not in charge. And until we started behaving more like it, and the general learned to trust me to the point where he'd be like, I need my advisor. Where is Pete? Because that's one of the biggest KPIs that I ever heard, was like, when I became the opposition, the partner's advisor, I would tell the commander, like, hey, that's a big thing. Because now I'm going to meet people that you don't get to meet, because you have to always be you. But I'm just Pete, and I can be introduced to anybody.
Yeah, and I'm sure part of the grudge that he had was in the background. We invaded the country and we occupied the country. We didn't ask him if he wanted us to do that, right. And now we're just assuming that, like, well, that already happened and that's done. Now work with us. And in the back of his mind, there's always that feeling of like, you're in my country without my permission. Yeah, I'm working with you because I have to, but I didn't ask you to be here. And then add on top of that the small little things in each meeting that rub him the wrong way, and the small inconsistencies with the courtesies that he's used to that we're not doing, or that we just don't even know we should do. And that he's just collecting that data, even in his subconscious, and it's informing the way that he behaves.
For sure. It is so complex, and it's easy to go backwards, harder to go forwards, in those kind of relationships. we've done this for about an hour and 20 minutes, man, and I love it. I'm super stoked about all the things we've talked about. But I've sort of dominated the entire conversation, and I want to make sure you get a chance to bring up anything else you want to bring up. Obviously, everybody should buy this book and make it do well. And look, if you're a warrior, have this and understand it. And even if you disagree with it, at least you're working from theory and you're doing your own thing. So everybody should get this book. There's the link down below. What else do you want to get into? What else do you want to say? What did we miss? What should I have asked you?
Well, actually, I have another book coming out this summer. It's on Iran, and pretty excited about it because I got a bunch of stuff declassified with FOIA. Freedom of Information Act. A lot of it's declassified CIA documents and other things, and also a lot of documents from Iran that I translated into English from Farsi, and there's some other things like from Turkish and Azerbaijani Turkish, and a lot of really interesting stuff. I also got my hands on all of the Iraqi intelligence from the 1980s and 90s that Saddam Hussein had in his intelligence on Iran. That was in Arabic, great. And now I've got it in English. So that book kind of looks in a way that you've never probably seen it before outside of the intelligence community. It's the first time anything like this is appearing in print for the public to read and to see, like, how does Iran actually do covert action? How do they do exactly? How do they do intelligence operations, like running human sources? How do they do that? How do they target? How do they recruit? How do they train? How do they do unconventional warfare? How does the Quds Force go to Sudan, for example, and build up a Sudanese surrogate force that the regime can then use in that country, which they have done, and I talk about that in the book. So I'm super excited about it because, like I said, it's never been in print before. So I want to bang people over the head with this because I think a lot of people don't understand what Iran's doing. They just look at it as this big scary thing. There are certainly scary things, but fear is just uncertainty. Once you remove uncertainty, you're not afraid anymore. Now you know what to do. You know what to do next. What's the next step? And I would hope that the decision makers, practitioners, even the interested public reads this, so that they can better understand like what they're looking at, because I think there's a lot of mystery that a lot of people feel, and I would want to just get that mystery fixed so that people know what is actually in front of me. What is the actual threat? Maybe I thought that this thing was a threat, but it was actually this other thing. And this whole time I've been focusing on this one path, and it was totally wrong. And spoiler alert, that is what's happening. But it's in the book, and I definitely encourage people to read that.
Yeah. There's a great book with that kind of a thing. It's called The Moth in the Iron Lung. And it was about the outbreak of polio and how much of it, all of the science banked on this one idea, and that we're all downstream from it still today. And we didn't pick the best idea, you know?
Yeah.
And it's crazy. So it doesn't mean that polio didn't happen, but the whole book goes into it. And it's amazing when we see these things, these other tools, like we can see it in somebody else. But when someone shows it to us, we're like, I don't think I did that. Well, we did. We all did. I lost the war. Much as I'm hard on the generals, I lost the war. I didn't win.
Yeah.
You know, the greatest thing I built, the greatest accomplishment I had, a year later, people got killed, you know, and not, it wasn't my fault, but it's my fault because I'm the guy that gets the information, and they didn't read the report, and the report didn't have any stickiness to it. And so they did the wrong thing, and they got themselves blown up. Right. And so I'm as responsible as anybody. And that's why I'm desperate to talk about these things openly so people can understand irregular war. It's complicated, not easy. You're going to fail more than you get it right. And the more you fail, the faster you get better at it sometimes.
We've got to have the courage to bring our flaws to the front and just confront those flaws, because that's just like a muscle. When you exercise, the reason your muscles get bigger is because you're tearing the fibers. We need to look at our own torn fibers and say, how are we going to become stronger now that we're honest with ourselves that we did that thing wrong? How do we not do that wrong next time?
Every time a spy gets kicked off a camp by its home team, you should get an award. It'd be like, how many silver stars you got? 27. You must be a good spy. Get me over here, you know? Oh, it's so funny. Anything in closing before we wrap this up? And again, thanks, man. I love it. You got me very excited about, I just am so passionate about this topic because I know we can do better. And here it is, you know? So.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you took me on, because I feel like we have a lot of institutional knowledge, you and I and other people in our field, that it's going to wither away very quickly. And it's important to capture it in as many ways as we can so that the next people can maybe do a Google search someday and be like, oh, wow, somebody talked about this 10 years ago. Let me listen to that. And I hope that happens.
Yeah. I mean, legitimately, like the Hackett name, when I say Benedicte Grandma, you should have been like, oh, yeah, I read everything she's written. Right. Because you care about Pashtunistan. And that's not a knock on you. That's a knock on the institution.
Yeah.
That's a knock on all those TRADOC generals who are like, we're going to train everybody to jump over a mud wall. Like, okay, great. I knew that. And I've done 0 push-ups in combat. Could we
Right.
maybe get a mastery of these things? No? Okay, great. Yeah. All right, I'm going to shut up, and I'll come back and say goodbye to you in a second. Everybody else, how about that? That's a pretty cool show. But you didn't expect to get that. And there'll be more next week. All right, I'll see you all later, and I'll see you in a second. Hang on.